The most expensive car in someone's driveway is often the one they can't afford to fix. That's what the Mercedes-Benz W221 S-Class became for thousands of owners who bought one used, believing they had found a bargain on the finest sedan in the world. They were not wrong about the car. They were wrong about what owning it would eventually cost them. But the most expensive part of this car is not the V8 or the air suspension. It is a small plastic component buried deep inside the engine that costs less than $50 to manufacture. And when it fails, it can take the entire $90,000 car with it. We will look at exactly where that clock is hiding in a moment. But to understand why, you have to go back to the car that made the W221 necessary in the first place. By the early 2000s, Mercedes-Benz had a problem that no amount of marketing could paper over. The W220 S-Class, the generation that ran from 1998 to 2005, had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong inside the company during the Daimler-Chrysler merger years. The merger itself, announced in 1998 as a supposed meeting of equals between Daimler-Benz and Chrysler, had created enormous cost-sharing pressure across every product line. Development timelines were compressed, validation periods were shortened, and the W220, which was deep in development when the merger closed, absorbed the consequences of that pressure. What came out of Sindelfingen was a car that looked extraordinary and felt extraordinary in its first years. But the W220's problems were not cosmetic. Rust was appearing in the tailgate and lower body sections of cars that were only a few years old. The active body control suspension, which ran hydraulic fluid through lines at extreme pressure to actively manage body movement, was failing at rates that generated lawsuits in some markets. The electronics, which were genuinely advanced for their time, were also genuinely fragile, in ways that dealers struggled to diagnose and owners struggled to afford. Meanwhile, Lexus had spent those same years doing the opposite. The LS430 had become the reliability benchmark for the entire luxury sedan segment. Consumer satisfaction surveys were not close, and BMW's 7 Series, the E65 generation, had its own problems with its first-generation iDrive system, but it was at least offering technology that felt intentional rather than broken. Mercedes-Benz needed to answer all of it at once. The W221 development brief, shaped by internal postmortems on the W220 failures, carried 2 requirements that were structurally in conflict with each other. The car had to be more reliable than the W220, and it had to be more technologically advanced than the Lexus LS460. Those 2 goals pull in opposite directions. Adding technology means adding components. Adding components means adding failure points. The only way to achieve both is to execute every individual system at a higher level than before, with no margin for compromise anywhere. The W221 program was given a longer validation period than the W220 had received. More aluminum was specified for the body panels. The corrosion treatment on the steel sections was more thorough. The W220's rust was addressed. The suspension's worst failure modes were redesigned. The electronics went through a longer test cycle. The repair counter, at least on paper, was back to 0. The question was how long it would stay there. When the W221 arrived in North American showrooms for the 2007 model year, the base price for an S550 was $88,395. That number bought something that felt genuinely different from anything Mercedes-Benz had produced before. The standard equipment list read like a technology brief from a defense contractor. Airmatic air suspension with electronically controlled dampers at all 4 corners. Radar-guided Distronic cruise control that could detect the vehicle ahead and modulate speed without driver input. Co-man navigation with a screen size that, by 2007 standards, felt generous. And pre-safe, a system that had no real equivalent anywhere in the segment at the time. When the stability control detected an imminent collision, the car responded before any impact. Seatbelts pre-tensioned. The passenger seat moved to a safer position. The sunroof closed. The windows raised. All of it in the fraction of a second before a potential impact that might never arrive. The engineering premise was that where an occupant sits at the moment of impact determines the injury outcome. A fraction of a second of repositioning changes that outcome. Then there was Night View Assist, a forward-facing thermal imaging camera built by FLIR Systems, displayed heat signatures from pedestrians and animals beyond the reach of the headlights. In 2007, the year the original iPhone was announced, Mercedes-Benz was fitting a production sedan with military contractor thermal imaging. It was on the options list. Anyone writing a check could have it, but there was a ghost in the machine, a literal ring of light connecting every electronic brain in the car. If that ring broke anywhere, the car would not just malfunction. It would lose its mind all at once. We will look at that failure and why it still haunts used market buyers today. The 7G-tronic 7-speed automatic was the first of its kind in a production luxury sedan. BMW and Lexus were both operating with fewer ratios at launch. More ratios kept the engine closer to its efficiency band across a wider range of speeds, which improved both fuel economy and refinement. Above the S550, the lineup expanded in ways that underlined how seriously Mercedes-Benz was treating this generation. The SE63 AMG, added for 2008, carried a 6.2-liter naturally aspirated V8 assembled by a single AMG technician from start to finish. Each completed engine left the factory with a small plaque on the cam cover, signed by the person who built it. Not a team, one person. The practice, which AMG called one man, one engine, traced back to the company's origins as an independent tuning operation. It meant that every S63 AMG that left Sindelfingen carried a traceable human signature inside it. At the top of the range, the long-wheelbase W221 platform underpinned the Maybach 57 and 62, the most expensive non-Rolls-Royce automobiles available at the time. The Maybach was built by stretching the W221's central tunnel section to extend the wheelbase. The drivetrain, front suspension architecture, and engine were shared with the S600. The entire Maybach project existed because developing a separate platform at Maybach's production volumes of roughly 300 to 400 units per year was economically impossible. The most exclusive car in the world was, underneath, the same car as the one in the Mercedes-Benz showroom down the street. In its first years, the W221 felt like proof that Mercedes-Benz had solved the problem. The materials were denser, the electronics worked. The ride was composed in a way the W220 had promised and rarely delivered. But underneath all of that promise, specific engineering decisions were already setting the clock. None of the W221 problems were obvious at the dealership. They were not visible in the brochure, and they certainly were not detectable on a test drive. They were embedded in engineering decisions that made complete sense in 2006, and they revealed their consequences somewhere around 80,000 miles. The first decision lived inside the M273 engine. The 5.5-liter naturally aspirated V8 in the pre-facelift S550 used a secondary chain to drive its balance shafts, and the guide rails that kept tension on that chain were made from a glass fiber reinforced plastic composite. The material choice was deliberate. Plastic guides produce less chain noise than steel guides, which matters enormously in a car where noise vibration and harshness suppression was a primary engineering target. The guides were lighter too, and that contributed to the overall weight reduction program. In a new engine, under controlled conditions, the material performed exactly as specified. The problem was thermal and mechanical cycling over time. At high mileages, typically above 80,000 to 100,000 miles, the composite material could wear, crack, or fracture. When fragments entered the oil circuit, they could be carried into the primary timing chain system. Mercedes-Benz issued technical service bulletins on the M273 balance shaft chain and guide inspection procedure as warranty claim patterns from 2007 and 2008. Production became statistically significant by 2009. The failure was not unique to the S-Class. The M273 was used across the E-Class, GL Class, and SL Class, meaning the same clock was running in a broad population of vehicles simultaneously. Compounding that risk was the flexible service system. The The W221 used an oil condition sensor to extend oil change intervals up to 13,000 miles under what the algorithm classified as favorable conditions. The system was designed around European driving patterns, primarily long-distance highway use with warm operating temperatures and infrequent cold starts. North American driving, with its shorter average trip distances and more frequent cold starts, created conditions where the algorithm was a less accurate predictor of actual oil condition. Owners following the flexible service system intervals without adjustment for their specific driving patterns were, in some cases, running degraded oil longer than their engines warranted. And degraded oil accelerated exactly the timing chain, guide where the M273 was already predisposed to. The 722.9 transmission carried its own embedded trade-off. Its torque converter lockup clutch was designed to engage at lower vehicle speeds than competing transmissions, reducing slippage losses and improving EPA cycle numbers. The consequence was more engagement cycles at lower speeds, more thermal cycling of the clutch-facing material, and in high-mileage examples, torque converter shudder under light throttle. A vibration felt through the drivetrain when the converter transitioned between lockup and slip modes. The suspension choice added another layer. Airmatic air suspension was standard in North America. Active body control, or ABC, was optional. These were two fundamentally different philosophies with two very different failure consequences. Airmatic failures were progressive. Air spring bags developed slow leaks, the vehicle sagged gradually, and the compressor worked harder until something gave way. Active body control failures were a different category entirely. The system ran continuously above 200 bar of hydraulic pressure, comparable to industrial machinery. The hydraulic lines were routed near exhaust components on some path segments. A line failure released hot pressurized fluid near hot surfaces. Mercedes-Benz service documentation for the W221 ABC system included specific warnings about exactly that scenario. Then there was the MOST bus, the fiber optic ring network connecting every infotainment and body control module operated on a closed-loop topology. Think of an old string of Christmas lights wired in series. One bulb fails, the entire string goes dark. The MOST bus worked the same way. If any single connection broke, every module connected to it lost communication simultaneously. Navigation, audio, climate display, and interior lighting all went dark at once from a single failed connector somewhere in the trunk or door sill. But diagnosing which connector required Mercedes-Benz X-Entry software. Standard OBD2 scan tools could not access the fiber optic ring at all. Most independent mechanics were effectively locked out of any fault that lived in that network. If this sounds like a car that should not exist past 100,000 miles, that instinct is understandable. And yet there are fleet operators in North American cities with W221 cars that have crossed 400,000 miles on the original drivetrain. They knew something the average owner did not, and we will look at their maintenance approach toward the end of this video. These were not flaws that showed up on day one. They were invisible until mileage revealed them. The warranty period on a W221 S550 was 4 years or 50,000 miles. For most original owners, that window closed right around the time the car changed hands for the first time. And that timing mattered enormously because the failure patterns that had been quietly developing inside these cars began surfacing in the used market, just as the first wave of W221s was becoming affordable to a second generation of buyers. The M273 balance shaft chain guide issue became statistically visible in Mercedes-Benz warranty data by 2009. Technical service bulletins issued during that period described an inspection and replacement procedure for the balance shaft chain components, which confirmed what independent workshops were already beginning to see in cars with higher mileage. When the plastic guide material fractured, the fragments did not stay in one place. They entered the oil circuit and were carried through the engine's lubrication system. In a car that cost $90,000 new, the consequence of ignoring that failure was timing chain skip, and in advanced cases, the kind of catastrophic timing system failure that made the engine itself uneconomical to save. The airmatic suspension followed a more predictable arc, which was both its saving grace and its defining characteristic as a maintenance item. The air spring bags at all four corners aged at roughly similar rates, meaning that when one bag developed a slow leak, the others were usually not far behind. The vehicle would sag overnight, the compressor would work harder to maintain ride height, and a suspension fault warning would appear on the instrument cluster. The process gave owners time to act, which was more than the ABC system ever offered, but acting meant replacing all four air springs, which was a significant repair bill regardless of who performed the work. Owners who ignored the warning long enough forced the compressor into continuous operation, and a compressor that ran without rest failed on its own schedule, adding another line item to an already expensive repair. The 722.9 transmission told its story through feel rather than warning lights. The torque converter shudder in high-mileage examples started as a faint vibration under light throttle, easy to dismiss as road texture. Over time, it became harder to ignore. Valve body solenoid degradation brought shift quality changes, hesitation on engagement, firmness where there had been smoothness. Owners who had not been told what to expect drove through the early warning signs until the repair cost had grown considerably larger than it needed to be. The most bus created a different kind of problem. When a fiber optic connection failed inside the ring network, the diagnostic experience for an unprepared owner was genuinely disorienting. Audio, navigation, interior lighting, and climate display going dark simultaneously made the car feel as though it had suffered a fundamental electrical collapse. The actual fault was often a single connector, but reaching that conclusion required Zentry access, which meant a dealer visit or a specialist with the right software. For owners outside major metropolitan markets, that dependency translated directly into dealer labor rates for every non-powertrain fault. In 2010, Mercedes claimed they had fixed the engine's most consequential flaw with a biturbo V8. But in the world of the S-Class, fixed rarely means resolved. It more often means redirected. And the facelifted W221 introduced a set of sensitivities that, for some owners, made it the more demanding car to live with long-term. Then came the 2010 facelift, and with it the M278 biturbo V8 in the S550. Mercedes-Benz had solved the balance shaft guide problem. The M278's revised construction eliminated that specific failure mode entirely, but the turbocharged architecture introduced new sensitivities. Oil consumption above what owners expected began appearing in M278-equipped cars, and the turbochargers added a heat-soak vulnerability that the naturally aspirated M273 had never required owners to think about. Shutting down a hot M278 without allowing the engine to idle briefly first could carbonize oil in the turbocharger-bearing feed lines. The pattern was becoming clear. Each solution carried a new problem forward. So, why did the W221 not simply disappear into the same graveyard as other over-engineered luxury cars from that era? The answer comes down to a distinction that sounds simple, but matters enormously in the used car market. The W221's failures were expensive, but they were predictable. That distinction is everything. An owner who buys a high-mileage W221, knowing that air springs will need replacing, that the timing chain components on an M273 engine require attention, and that a valve body rebuild may be on the horizon, can plan for those costs. They can budget, schedule, and negotiate. What they cannot do with an unpredictable failure is any of those things. The W221's failure modes were the kind that gave warnings, left evidence, and responded to maintenance. That made the car survivable in a way that a vehicle with sudden terminal failures simply cannot. Fleet operators understood this before private buyers did. Livery services and executive transport companies ran W221 fleets throughout the car's useful life, and they developed internal maintenance protocols for the known failure points. They created service plans for airmatic service intervals, timing chain inspections, and valve body fluid changes on defined schedules. The highest mileage W221 survivors did not reach those numbers through luck. They reached them through maintenance schedules that looked less like a car owner's logbook and more like an aircraft service record. The independent specialist network mattered too. More North American shops had invested in entry diagnostic software than had equivalent access for the BMW 7 Series E65 of the same era, and that wider distribution meant W221 owners had more options when something went wrong outside a major city. Geographic access to competent diagnosis is not a glamorous factor in a car's survival, but it is a real one. The W221 rewarded a specific kind of ownership. Informed, attentive owners who were willing to engage with the car on its own terms kept these cars running. Owners who changed oil more frequently than the flexible service system suggested, who addressed air spring degradation before the compressor failed, who found a specialist with entry access before they needed one urgently, those owners kept their cars running well into genuinely high mileage. The car did not survive despite its complexity. It survived because its complexity was, at least in principle, manageable. The W221 did not exist in isolation. It was a point on a line, and the line only moved in one direction. The W222, which replaced the W221 for 2014, continued every trend the W221 had established. More driver assistance systems, cellular connectivity built into the infotainment platform, adding a software update dependency. The W221's closed, most architecture had never required. The suspension complexity remained. The diagnostic barrier remained. The failure mode profile of a high-mileage W222 will in time mirror the same pattern. What the W221 showed, and what each generation since has confirmed, is that the modern luxury car ownership proposition is not what it was. The old Mercedes-Benz promise, the one the W116 and W126 generations built their reputations on, was that complexity served permanence. The engineering was dense because the car was meant to last. The W221 era introduced a different relationship between complexity and longevity. The systems were dense because the technology was new, the competitive pressure was real, and the development brief demanded both capability and reliability at once. Those goals were not always compatible, and when they were not, capability won. That trade-off became the template. Each generation since has added capability and complexity, and the long-term ownership cost has followed the same trajectory. The gap between the informed buyer and the one who simply expects a Mercedes-Benz to take care of itself has widened with every model year. The W221 was where that gap first became visible. It was more reliable than the W220 in the ways that mattered to the people writing the development brief. The rust was addressed. The most catastrophic suspension failures were made more manageable. The electronics worked better in the first years. And none of that was enough to prevent the car from becoming, for unprepared second and third owners, exactly the kind of expensive problem that the W220 had been before it. The car meant to fix everything became the first example of something new. Not a failure, exactly, something more complicated than that. The W221 was genuinely better than what came before it, and that improvement came at a price that only revealed itself over time. The complexity it introduced did not stay in one generation. It became the foundation. Every S-Class since has built on, and the ownership proposition has grown more demanding with each one. The next video is a different kind of story. In 1995, Toyota launched a car with a flat floor, more interior space than a Crown Victoria, and a name that literally meant paradise. Everything pointed to success. Go watch that one next.